I'm over here at the previous gardens doing a little bit of harvesting. Somebody asked me the other day when they heard that I was an author of Florida gardening books, and he said, "Can you tell me how to grow a beautiful beefsteak tomato?" And I told him, "Not really. You're not growing the right thing for Florida." Today I'm going to show you how we adapted our plants from the proper climate rather than trying to adapt the climate to our plants. If that makes sense. That's a very weird way to put it. Let's just roll the fountain. Go smash that on our fence.
Smash this one on your fence, Dad.
An example of growing with the climate instead of against it are these yams. These are the true yams, Dioscorea species. There are quite a few different edible varieties of yams. And we're kind of on the border right here. This is a tropical species, but it loves the heat and the humidity, and it doesn't have insect problems. It grows all these little roots which we can plant. But beneath the ground on each one of these vines, which stretch way back here, I have 3 big rows of them, there is another root. And that root is very similar to a white potato. I think we've got about 5 or 6 different species of yams in here, and we're testing to see which ones match the best. And by figuring out which ones match the climate the best and do the best, then we have a staple that we can use. Because white potatoes, some years are pretty good, some years are not so great, and they have a lot of pest issues and problems. But these guys have just gone right on through. I knew they liked the heat, I knew they liked the humidity, and so I decided, let's just plant a big mess of them and make this our staple root instead of our touchy white potatoes. And we can use them much like we can make mashed potatoes out of them. We can put them in stews. They're very, very similar. It's a very good starch, except they actually fit the climate, so they're super easy to grow. If you're thinking about planting trees in your climate, you ask yourself which trees are going to be the easiest, because some things you're really going to be pushing it, and some things are going to be simple. And a way to figure that out is to figure out what grows in your area commercially, or what grows without care. If you see a particular tree growing here and there around town in empty, weedy lots without any care, that tree is probably a good one for your yard. Peaches here are touchy. There's a lot of issues with peaches. The climate is good for peaches, but you've got to baby them. They're kind of like growing lettuce. It takes effort. Whereas mulberries are super, super easy to grow. The red mulberries, the white mulberries, and the black mulberry species, all super, super easy. And you'll just see them sometimes growing in the woods, particularly the native red ones. But the black ones and the white ones grow just fine as well. They're just everywhere. And it's one of those old fruit trees that people forget about, but is truly excellent. And we had a Illinois everbearing mulberry, which, believe it or not, we were growing in Florida, even though it's Illinois everbearing. I was very happy in Florida. In our second year, we got 6 gallons of organic, delicious berries off that tree. That's in the second year. Think about how much those organic berries would cost in the supermarket if you were to buy something comparable in blackberries or raspberries. That was like $1 million worth of berries, completely organic. We just planted the tree in the ground, watered it a few times, gave it some mulch, and we got lots of mulberries. Even in the horrible soil that we have here, this mulberry is doing just fine. Some bugs chewing it up, but it doesn't matter. It's late in the year. Doesn't hurt it. It'll grow back, and as a matter of fact, when they get defoliated, they often come back and they produce another round of mulberries. Mulberries is one of those trees that's perfect in my climate. It may not be perfect in yours, so you're gonna have to do a little research and figure out what tree is super simple to grow in my climate, and then roll with it and make that one of your staple fruit trees. Another plant that grows really, really well in our climate that we can use as a staple root is the sweet potato. We've planted different varieties of sweet potatoes to see which ones do well. This is some sort of a purple one.
Almost.
That's very pretty. And very little care over here, and in exceptionally poor soil. You can barely even call it soil. Stick a piece in the ground and you get a sweet potato. If we had richer soil, we'd get many more. But we know that at least we're going to get something when we plant sweet potatoes. Let's see what we got here. Ah, that's truly insane. Another thing we're doing is we're land racing watermelons. My son Ezekiel has been planting seeds from all different varieties and then just letting them run. So these guys have been running through the Grocery Row gardens, and we've been getting a decent amount of small sweet watermelons from the crosses that are adapted to absolutely no care whatsoever. And we take these guys home and eat them and save the seeds and then plant them again to try and get stuff that fits the climate better. Basically by allowing genetic adaptation to fit the climate rather than just starting with preconceptions on what will work. We just plant a whole bunch of genes, the ones that survive and thrive get planted again. Another plant that has been very gratifying in this climate has been cassava. We planted a bunch of different varieties of cassava to figure out which one would actually go through, and then we lost track of the names of all of them, and some of them were random cuttings we got from Etsy and other things. But what we're doing is saving canes from varieties that can go through 8B here and actually produce roots before the winter in a short growing season. So short growing season cassava. They love it through the heat, they don't mind the horrible soil, and they produce roots for us. And for those of you that are asking, you know, when are you going to have cuttings for sale or something, it won't be this year, probably. We may have like a couple here and there if we have extras, but we have to save and plant out for ourselves. As you can see here, this variety is making roots that by the time the season is over, by the time the cold kicks in, there will be harvestable roots, which is a big deal because some cassavas can take 1.5 years to get harvestable sizes. So we just kept planting varieties until we got some that took. One thing you can do if you want to know what works in your area too is to figure out what people historically grew to feed themselves. There's a reason that black-eyed peas and okra and collards are very, very common in the South. And as you get further north, you'll notice that the varieties change. There are old varieties of pumpkin like Boston marrow, big winter squash, or pumpkin, depending on what you want to call it. And it was a great storage variety, but if you try to grow that down in the deep South, the vine borers love to eat that sort of stuff. They're just like, man, Yankee fruit, we haven't had this before, and they just eat it. You get down far south, you can grow some varieties of machada squash, like the tan cheese ones do well, the Seminole pumpkin does well, and butternuts do well in the South. But you may not get those big ones, so figure out what historically grew in your area and plant some of that. And feel free to experiment too, because nobody has historically grown cassava in this area, and I'm doing it. So you have your experimentation, and then you have your knowledge base from what's already happened in your area that you can look historically and say what works. So figure out what works, you have a basis to run with it, and then just keep throwing different plants at your garden to figure out which one is perfect for your backyard and does well consistently that you can rely on. I planted cucumbers as a ground cover, and then I moved. I didn't know I was going to be moving so soon. And so now I can go back and get these huge blimpy cucumbers like this. I planted a whole bunch of different varieties and just, you know, let them cross. So I could take these guys and take them back, and then in the spring plant them in my garden, and I will have a variety that's crossed up that managed to survive me completely ignoring them for months and made fruit despite all the weeds and the absolutely abysmal soil. Again, so we're land racing the cucumbers. Don't know which variety grows? Plant 12 different varieties, let them all cross, save the survivors. Boom, there you go. Look up Joseph Lofthouse if you haven't already. Great stuff. Landrace gardening. Something else we discovered over the years by planting different peppers was that hot peppers tend to do much, much better for us than sweet peppers. Another thing we discovered over the years was that hot peppers did a lot better for us in southern climates, particularly in Florida, but we've found the same here in lower Alabama. They've done much better than sweet peppers, particularly large sweet peppers. A lot of these peppers in here are actually self-seeded because I chopped and dropped. I had so many peppers last year, way beyond what I expected. And so now I have an abundance of peppers, and they just seem to take care of themselves, which is a great thing, except that it's really hard to use a ton of hot peppers. This is another great fruit tree for the deep south. zone 7, 8, 9. This is the Japanese persimmon. The native persimmons do well here too, but the Japanese persimmon can make these nice, big, amazing fruit. And some of them are non-astringent, like this Fuyu persimmon. The Fuyus are nice because you can eat them right off the tree. They don't have to get ripe all the way, and they don't turn your mouth into cotton when you eat them. But the Hachiya, the larger, more acorn-shaped ones that I've had too, those are astringent, and you've got to wait until they have completely turned into pudding. But the flavor is spectacular. I think it's much richer than the Fuyu. It's got like a spiciness to it that's incredible. But either variety grows very, very well and is super simple. And we've learned through trial and error that that is, I mean, just plant it in your yard and pretty much forget it. It's eventually going to make you some persimmons, which is the closest thing to a mango you can grow here. These Cassava squash were another one we discovered. It's an Italian heirloom. It's actually the same species as birdhouse gourd. This one has been really great for us. Very, very productive. Much easier to grow than other summer squashes, and doesn't get to pest issues. That's nice. Super simple. You just have to have a place for it to climb, and it'll just cover it. Some of these even self-seeded in here. It's crazy. They're just becoming a weed, which is exactly what I want. Just like these Bloopers, which I'm not going to talk about. What I've been telling you today is useful if you're just doing regular backyard gardening. It makes your life simpler to understand what grows in your climate rather than trying to force things to grow against it. Forcing things to grow against it is a hobby of mine, but it's not what I base my food supply on. I tend to think in terms of survival and independence from the food supply lines as much as possible. And so trying to get plants into my yard that I know are going to make me food, maybe if everything disappeared, or also would get me through a bad financial stretch or anything else, and also keep me fed without there being any GMOs in there or pesticides or herbicides or anything else. What is so easy to grow that basically it just grows almost by itself? I base my garden on those things, starting first with the plants that make the most calories, and then secondarily with the plants that have the highest nutrition. And if you could think in that order in your garden, what is really easy to grow that gives you the calories you need, and then what will keep you fed with the best nutrition possible so you can avoid medications, etc. Keep those two things in mind and fit them to your climate. Historically, you can figure it out, and you can figure it out through experimentation, and a combination of the two is exceptionally powerful. If you want to learn more about survival gardening, check out my book, Grow or Die, The Good Guide to Survival Gardening. And thanks for joining me today. It's fun to be back here and to see that my methods worked quite well, even in this horrendous soil. And I can't wait to see what my gardens are going to look like this next year in better dirt. So join me, subscribe, and follow along, and I'll show you what we do next. And until next time, may your thumbs always be green.
Try chasing twilight with too high beams. Is this real or are you a dream? Mist and confusion, a buzz in my ear. Darker than midnight, nothing to fear. We're gonna make it, my fingers are crossed. I can't live without you, my compass is lost.
What type of sweet potato is? Why would it even do that? That's really weird.
That's the only one.
Yeah, it's like one giant one.
Like all the vines.
This is a great object lesson that makes absolutely no sense. So we'll put it at the end as an outtake. That's bizarre.